Welcome to ZBook Successful Authors Podcast. And tonight I have with me the author of a new #1 book, The Traveling IEP. Welcome, Dr. Toby. How are you?
Fine, thank you. Thank you so much for having me
You're, you're
tonight.
welcome. And you're in
Yeah.
California in my old backyard.
Yes, and here's the sun out. Yes.
Nice,
So
nice.
yeah.
And you're a
So
professor at Cal State?
LA. I'm
Los-
Yeah. So I'm a professor at Cal State Los Angeles, California University Los Angeles, and I teach special education policy and teacher credentialing, and um, I teach there also. And then I also work during the day at Los Angeles Unified School District, and so I've been doing that for about 11 years now.
Wow. And how long have you lived in California?
About 16 years. Yeah.
And
So.
before that, you were in Philadelphia. That's where you learned and went to college and everything.
Mhm. Yes. Actually, I got my master's in Pennsylvania. I got my undergrad in New York, but I went to Pepperdine University for my PhD, and Pepperdine
Mm.
is in Malibu, California.
Mm.
So I did that out here while I
I
was living
thought
out here a
Pepperdine
couple
was
years
back
ago.
east.
Pepperdine is in California, right
Mm.
overlooking the beautiful ocean.
Well, that shows you what I know.
Yeah.
What is your doctor in?
So I have a PhD in global leadership and change, and it is my mission to support and uh, uh, teach students with disabilities who are in higher education how to graduate, essentially. I started doing research for my doctorate and found that 72% of students with disabilities were dropping out of college. Now, the funny thing is, I was telling somebody that, when you write your dissertation, you don't usually write it about yourself, but I kind of did that in an out of, a sort of sneaky way. It was very much about myself. I was diagnosed with a learning disability as a child and in the 80s, and little girls with disabilities didn't usually get diagnosed with ADHD, and I was diagnosed at age 41 with ADHD. So I went all through school, K through 12, never knowing that I had ADHD. So but I had a learning disability. I was very good in there's a huge discrepancy, very low in math and very high in writing and linguistics. And so, I'd have straight A's in English. I actually got exempt from my senior final, but then I had D's in Spanish and math, and so it was, yeah, it was an interesting struggle. But when I went to Pepperdine, what I found in my research was that everything that I was finding about students with disabilities in college were things that I either went through or struggled with and had to overcome.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, that's why aren't little girls diagnosed? They don't have the same symptoms, or why
I
is that?
think in the 80s, a lot of women now in their 30s or 40s are are getting diagnosed now. They might think they have menopause or something like that, or they're,
Hmm.
going through a midlife crisis, and then they go to the doctors and they say, "Oh no, you have ADHD and you've always had it." And
Hmm.
I think in the 80s, 70s, and 80s, they just thought little girls were talkative and outgoing and friendly and whatever, but really there were symptoms of not being able to focus or not being able to finish tasks, getting distracted. I love bouncing from topics. I have to really hyper focus, but
Mhm.
what I've found is the opposite of that with ADHD is that people with ADHD, girls and boys, doesn't matter. When you're hyper focused on something, you get stuck on something and you force go through that. That's another trait, another aspect of ADHD, which is often overlooked because I think that's a strength. When you're
Hmm.
focused on, I'm gonna get my PhD. I'm gonna get my PhD. I'm gonna do it, and that's what you are doing. It's good and bad. You're gonna do it, but then you push everything else to the side. So that's kind of the downside of it. But many people with ADHD get very hyper focused, and that's often seen for working people when they get they work too much on one thing, or if that's all they do. that one thing, and then they don't have a balance between exercise and family and other things. So
Yeah, that's interesting. Focus is something I need more of. It's one of those things that we're all, as we get older, we need to focus more. So yeah, I think that's a superpower, actually.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, and I talked about that in my book. I was really pleased that it became a #1 bestseller, and I'm trying to get it out there to families and educators. It is my dream to have this book at every single university someday.
Well, tell us
Because
about your book then.
yeah, so I started this, it was sort of a spin-off of my research, but I didn't want it to be research heavy because I wanted it to be accessible to people who are not scholars. I didn't want it to just be a book just for college. I wanted it for be for parents, for students with disabilities. Anybody can read this book, and that's what I wanted it to be accessible for parents to understand it and not have to. I actually included, a glossary with it with definitions of terms so that, if they said, well, what's an IEP? Some people don't even know what that is. An IEP is an individualized education plan for a student who K through 12, they have every accommodation. It's mandated in the law. So my book is very law heavy, and I tried to make it understandable for people who don't read law. Nobody goes around just reading case law. So that was how I did it. So I did that by storytelling. Here's what I have. I was diagnosed with this, and this teacher did this and this teacher did that, and I had to sit for this, this happened and this. So I started telling my story and linking it to all my research.
Yeah, I read first part of your book, and boy, I really started hating Mrs. Brown. Can you tell us
Everybody
about
says
Mrs.
that.
Brown?
Oh, yeah, one of my teachers in elementary school, and everybody says that. Everybody says, "Oh my gosh, Mrs. Brown." Yeah. I remember that I had written something about our summer vacation, and I wrote on a lined piece of paper, front and back, and I wrote about this day and that day and going to the beach and doing this and doing that, all of these things, and I remember that I thought it was brilliant, and she threw it away and said, no, you're supposed to just do this, draw a picture and do 3 sentences. I'm like, 3 sentences? That's not writing. That's not even a paragraph, and here as a child without limitations, because I just, when you're a child, you think you can do anything. So from a child's perspective, I was like, I'm going to write a novel right now. So and I thought, well, nobody's going to stop me from, like I said, this is what I'm going to do. So, and I just did it. And rather than, I think from a teaching perspective, as a teacher, then I switched into teacher role. Why not take that student who's written all of that and highlight that and say, this is excellent, draw a picture with it. And she made me mold to her expectations rather than what I was able to do. I exceeded the ability, but she molded it to what she wanted, and I resented that, and I never forgot that. From then on, I had to do what they told me to do. The teachers told me, you have to do it this way, you have to do it this way, and rather than the way that I learn. And so as a teacher in East LA, when I for 10 years, I taught students with disabilities in the classroom with learning disabilities like me. So I was essentially teaching 2 kids like me. And they weren't all perfect, obviously, but it was easier to relate when they were having a day or a bad day or whatever was going on. I was there. I was like, you know what? This happened to me. I totally get it. Or if they didn't know how to write something, I'm very positive. If I had a student, write something that didn't fit on my writing wall, I made it work. I didn't tell her, oh, we have to cut this down. No, let them do what they need to do. And that's when I've done, articles and other podcasts where I've talked about writing and, why does every book have to be the same? No, it's not. We're different people. Every person is different. So, and everybody's here for a reason, and we all have a purpose. So, my book is going to be different from somebody else who writes about IEPs. There's tons of IEP books all over the place, but for education and so forth, and there's experts all over. I've been on many, I wear many hats. So I've been on different sides, and that's how I think I'm successful in reaching the students. And then as a student myself, I remember being there as the student, and now I'm the teacher, or now I'm the coordinator, and whatever I'm doing. So.
That's cool. Yeah. I had a Mr. Brown in my fifth grade or fourth grade class, but he was cool. This Mrs. Brown, she not
Yeah.
only did that to you, but then she took your paper and crumpled it up and threw it away.
And threw it away.
That must
Yeah.
have made you mad.
Well, I didn't even get to take it home or anything, but I remember what I wrote. But it made me. I just, again, I think we need to. Um, First of all, we need to change the way we teach. Teachers need to change the way they teach. And that's one of the things I address in this book, is not only do teachers need to change the way they teach K through 12, but then in higher education, professors tend to teach, they profess. And this is straight from my book. They stand there and they stand at they lecture and for hours about math or science or whatever they're teaching. And after a while, people in general, even non-disabled peers, you can only focus for like 10 minutes. That's it. And then you just stop listening. However, unless you're really into that one subject, but most people, they take notes and then they zone out, and that's it. So unless there's an activity or hands-on, or they're doing, you learn through doing. I learn through doing. So I keep that in mind when I have projects, or I have, I do discussions or group projects when I teach online with my students. I want them to be engaged. I always ask them, at the end, did you learn at least one thing that you learned today in class? And if we're talking about, whatever we're talking about. So if we're talking about, the theory of is Vygotsky or something. So I want to make sure that they've learned, what's the proximal zone of development, what does that mean, and so I want to make sure that, so I'm checking for understanding. So I go back to my education, but most professors, and I put this in my book, are not educators. They're professors, but they are not educators. There's a big difference. They've never taught. So, I mean, most, unless you've taught, most educators in higher ed have an expertise. There was one man that I interviewed who was a head of a business, very famous company. He was the president of a company in Pennsylvania, and and he was teaching college, and I interviewed him as a subject for my study. And I said, have you ever taught? He said, oh no, I was the president of this company, and now I'm teaching online classes. I said to him, how are you supporting your students with disabilities? And he says, I asked them, I know you're in Germany, but I asked them, what are the special education laws? What laws do you know? And they, what laws do you know that support these students? And they just, for all of my study participants, I got crickets. None of them knew about the Higher Education Act. None of them knew about, they didn't say, oh, the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, passed in 1990. That covers students in college. But in higher and in elementary, K through 12, the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, covers K through 12 students. So I don't expect them, again, to go read these laws, but they should have some kind of knowledge of, well, I'm providing accommodations, and they have, what are the accommodations? And they said, well, I don't know, I just, whatever the college tells me to do. And they seemed very nervous that they might get sued. A lot of them thought, I do whatever I have to do so I don't, get sued. What do I have to do so I don't get fired? And so that was an interesting thing that I got, that, and now I'm a professor at Cal State LA. But I don't think like, gosh, what do I have to do so I don't get fired? No, I don't think like that. I think, how I'm going to support these students so they can become great teachers. So it's also that's where it goes back to the perspective. What is the perspective? And it would be so much easier if what happened K through 12 just continued and traveled to college. The students wouldn't have to think about it. The professors wouldn't have to think about it. It would just travel. It would be ideally, and this is me, ideally there should be a national law, just like with K through 12, that the IEP just travels to college.
Yeah, it
Why
only
is
goes
that?
through
Yeah.
K through 12, and then it's
And I wrote an article called The Vanishing IEP. It literally, the minute you graduate, it vanishes. And I've had like, why? What happens? Parents come to me every day because I do 1,200 IEP students. There's 1,200 students that I serve with IEPs. As a coordinator, I'm doing, their IEPs. Parents come to me every day. What's going to happen when they graduate? What's going to happen when they graduate? What's going to that question? What's going to happen when they graduate?
So what
And
is,
then,
go ahead, sorry.
yeah, no, please.
So what's the problem? The colleges don't want to deal with it, or they don't know how to, or is it something like it seems like it could be easily adapted in college.
Adapted?
Well,
I
because
think
it's from high school, and then it has to be.
so. Here's the word that you want.
Yeah.
It's optional.
Oh.
Ew. Ew.
Oh.
K through 12, it's mandatory. There's a law mandated. It's mandated. Higher ed, not mandated.
But
that's the difference.
I mean, they could do it.
They can, but they don't have to. They can, but they don't have to. So that's where I went once I wrapped my head around that for 6 years. I tossed that around in my head and took from that baby seed of why doesn't that question, just one question, why doesn't the IEP travel to college? And then I went to the research, and then I did my dissertation, and then I wrote this book. That's where this book started, was it would be so much easier if it just traveled, and it doesn't. So here's what I did. In my book, I put literally that K through 12, it's mandatory. IDEA is the law that mandates they go to due process. The parents can sue the district. The district has to train they have to. Higher ed, they don't have to. Plain and simple. You don't want to go to college here? Don't go to this college.
But the university system is like, it gets money from the federal government or whatever government, right?
You're
they can
right.
mandate it, right?
You're right.
Maybe
and so when I always say, here's the difference, and I wrote this in the book. Judith Heumann, and she just passed, God bless her. She was, the mother of the ADA. She made it possible for access to be there. It's there. You have access to the universities. But what the problem is, they open the door, you're welcome to come in, but the professors don't know what to do once they're in the room. So that's kind of how I put it. They have the coverage. ADA covers them, but the professors don't know what to do with it once it's there. So they just do the same thing. They do what they've always done. They go back to, well, this is how I've always done it. And that was one of the things I found in the study. The study's, it's not that old. It's just a year and a half old or something. And so it's not like it's 30 years ago. These are people that are still teaching right now. And the thing is, how can we they have access, but they're still not getting the services? So that's why if they have an IEP, literally they have then it would be individualized. And there's so many students that don't know what they want to do. They don't have any direction. If they had goals in their IEPs, that would be an outline of their specially designed instruction. That's how they would find their majors. That would help them and support them.
So what are some of the other excuses you've heard along the way? I could imagine that the class size is bigger in university, right? So
excuses for what?
For not adopting it. For not
adopting it. They actually just yesterday, there's something called the RISE Act. And so this is a lot of again, the law. I read a lot of legislation for fun because I'm interested in that, and I'm kind of, that's my thing. So, but I do. They just passed, or they not passed. They introduced for 6 years now. They have introduced the RISE Act to get supports, not IEPs. Don't mix the two. They want more support for students, but it's not an actual IEP. So my concept is still original in the sense that they're not adopting IEPs. And so they're introducing this, but that's where it stopped. For 6 years now, it's been introduced into Congress, and it's never been to the next step. It's never passed. And so it's, it's 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years. I hope with this book that hopefully I've set the groundwork for my vision that my book should be in every single college. Teachers should be reading it. Professors should be reading it. Presidents of universities should be using, teaching this. And I actually do lectures and programs to teach them special ed law, so it's not scary, because I don't want it to be scary. Law can be scary. I don't want it to be scary. It's really not. So,
but it's already in Congress.
It's introduced and it stays there. It's stagnant. It's very strange that it'll stay there for a while. I mean, they could adopt it, but it's been sitting for 6 years now. It stayed in that introduced stage. Different senators have introduced it, including the one that I wrote about in the Traveling IEP, named Senator Bob Casey from Pennsylvania. He's very active, and I've actually met with his people and his education director and so forth. And I've met with people in Washington, D.C. about it. I've met with people at NCLD, the National Center for Learning Disabilities, about it. So I'm trying to get it out there and understand that it's been introduced, and hopefully, fingers crossed, that they will adopt it, and then I hope that will lead to greater things for the Traveling IEP. I hope more parents get the Traveling IEP and understand. I want them to understand and be educated and not ask, well, what happens after? I want them to be able to know and say, well, I understand, I read about this, that this is what happens. And if you Google, I'll leave you with this. There are colleges in the United States, if you can Google it today, and it would be true, that there are still colleges in the United States and other places in the world that, but in the United States, they don't have accessibility or disability services on their campus. So that in itself excludes people with disabilities.
Yeah, it sounds like you're in the lobbying phase. You have to become a lobbyist now, and maybe get somebody like Elon Musk on your side. I heard he has, I think, autism or something. And
I think I believe so, but I actually am involved with I've worked with the Rich Policy Group, NOD, the National Organization with Disabilities, NCLD, LDA. I've worked with a lot of different policy groups. Now we're at the stage where you need to get all of those groups to be together as one big group and then storm Washington. So that's how that,
yeah. Well, they call it an act of Congress for a reason. Yeah.
Yes. So
there are hundreds of bills every year, and only one or two of them get passed. But maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Not passing
everything. But I want families and students. And the other thing is, students can read this. Students with disabilities like myself can read this and get strategies for how to connect with professors. I put a lot of emphasis on that because that's what I did. You need to find that one person that believes in you, that professor, and that's when you're on campus, you go talk to them. If you want to major in English, go talk to the dean of the English department. Or if you want to major in science or math, go talk to talk to people. And everybody's got different personalities, but that's how you do it. I think there are a lot of people who are not good readers and writers, but they're good at listening and speaking. So that's how they can, I think Simon Sinek has ADHD, and he he hates reading. He's got all these books and never reads them, but he gets in conversation with people. And there are a lot of people who do that. They're very active in class. That's what one of the things I did was how I learned was I would raise my and say, oh, let me see if I understand this correctly. Blah, 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 and I would engage almost like I would drown everybody else out in the lecture hall as if I were the only one with that professor. And you kind of have to act like that, even though you look like a brown nose or they get to know you, and then they root for you. I root for every semester I have students with disabilities in my class, and I root for them.
Mm-hmm. And so did you learn public speaking before or during your becoming a doctor teacher?
I've been doing public speaking my whole life. I'm just a natural public speaker. So, but as far as speaking for speaking events, I've been doing it for, I'd say 6 years or more. So yeah. And I've done, speaker series events at different schools and so forth.
Cool.
So, yeah.
Oh, well, back to your book. So
yeah.
did you get into writing for this book, or you were always good at writing?
Always oh, that's my thing. I've always been good at writing, and I love writing articles. I've written tons of articles. Even back when I was doing my master's, I wrote articles that got published locally, the Daily Local News, or I've just always written about different topics in special education because that was always my interest. So
cool.
yeah.
So getting back to your book,
Mm-hmm.
what would you leave out? We were in the middle part, and then do you want to do the conclusion part of your book, or do you want to save that?
Well, I mean, as far as the conclusion, I mean, how does my book end? Or what do you mean as far as conclusion?
Yeah, because there's a lot of stories in there, and I didn't get to read the rest of it.
Oh, okay. Well, basically, towards the end, I did talk a lot about the policies. That's I already talked about the policies and the RISE Act, and I did talk about Senator Bob Casey and Diana DeGette, who are some of the policymakers. And so I did focus towards the end of the book about that. But then I will leave you with this. What I found when I started doing research was that less than 1% of students with disabilities become scholars. And so that was one of the things that interested me, is that there's a lack of research in this area. And at first, when I started at Pepperdine back in 2017, I said, oh my gosh, I can't write about this because there's nothing to research. They don't have any research. And my professors were the ones who said, no, this is gold. You are the one to contribute the research. And so I started looking, oh, I'm the one who's going to contribute to that. And I just met somebody this morning who told me that they cited my work, and that because I'm putting all this work out, that I'm the one setting the trail of students with disabilities in college and becoming why not graduate? You can't go to higher, to get a PhD or an EDD if you don't have your undergrad. You have to graduate and then get your master's, and then so there's a stigma that students with disabilities are not smart and that they're not scholars. And I beg to differ, because I am a scholar, I'm very smart, and I can do it. And I'm an advocate. I speak out for those who are also, they want to go to school. They are good at school. And I challenge the teachers that say, well, they're not good at reading, so they're not going to be able to, or they're not good at writing. Go to the writing center. It's fine. You can use voice command on your computer now, and you can talk, so there's all these things that you can do. So when they say, oh, I'm not a good writer, that's not a good reason to not write your dissertation. You should become a scholar. We need more scholars. I'm proud to be a scholar, and I think there need to be more people graduating. Like I always say, when students fill out that application and apply to college, they don't dream of dropping out. They dream of graduating. They dream of graduating. And that's what I want to do for everybody.
Okay. If you don't mind, let's do the blitz round, where I ask a quick question and you give a quick answer. Okay, ready?
All right, ready?
What's in your pockets right now?
Nothing.
Nothing. Okay.
Like
What's your number one life hack
life hack?
or
Meaning,
productivity hack?
oh, making lists. I make a lot of lists. That's one of the things I do. Making lists. I've got lists everywhere, and I cross off what I do at each time. So,
Okay.
yeah. Is
If you
that
could eat dinner with anyone, past, present, or future, who would it be?
Simon Sinek, probably.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have a morning routine?
Yes, I get up, I take a shower, brush my teeth, drink my coffee, and I have a hard-boiled egg every morning, and then I pet my dog. So my dog,
What kind of dog is it?
Chow Chow Shepherd mix, Chow Chow Collie
Chow
Shepherd.
Chow Shepherd
Yeah,
mix. Oh,
with
Sigmund
blonde
Freud had a
hair.
Chow.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, she's cute. So she's 13.
Oh,
So
wow. Getting up
yeah,
there.
yeah.
Okay. What's the one question you wish people would ask you?
Um, what is your book about, and how can I get it?
Okay,
So I guess
cool.
that's two questions.
Oh, it's all right.
So
That's all right.
yeah.
All right then. So what's
Um,
on the horizon?
so I think since they just introduced, there's a new bill introduced in the RISE Act. I'm going to follow up with that. I'm also going to, in the next week or so, we have a holiday coming up, and I'll be traveling to see my family. And so I keep in mind with this book that these are families that have students with disabilities, or people have disabilities themselves. I just keep that in mind because I know that people who are reading this book, disabilities can be a very depressing topic. I don't want it to be a depressing topic. I'm not depressed. I'm very happy, and I don't want people to feel discouraged. I have a lot of grit and determination, and so I want people to have a different perspective about how they see people with disabilities. I want to change the stigma and um, just be able, have a more positive attitude, because that's how we're going to have students with disabilities graduate. And I don't want people to be discouraged and dropping out because they think they can't do it, or if somebody else in their life tells them they can't do it. You need to know to block that out and go for what you want anyway. If you want a college degree, go do it, and be scrappy and ask for help, and I, like I said, you got to go talk to your professors, and just get out there. And so I would definitely tell people, these are some of the things I've mentioned in my book. And I'm always happy to talk. I love telling people that they can do it. I want, I'm sort of like a transformational leader and a servant leader. I want to help other people graduate from college.
That's great. And be
Yeah,
scrappy. I love
be
that.
scrappy. Yep.
Where can people
So,
find you online? Where do you want them to go?
TobyTomlinsonBaker.net. You can find me on LinkedIn, Toby Tomlinson Baker. You can find me on Facebook, on Instagram, and you can find me on TikTok, or you can find me on Twitter. So I'm kind of on all of them, and I enjoyed. That's how I meet so many different kinds of people, and so I appreciate having me here today. This has been really a treat, and I hope that I globally I hope to reach more people, and that this isn't just it's. I talk a lot about law and um, politics, but I tell people, knowing somebody with a disability and helping people with disabilities is not it's a bipartisan. It shouldn't be a Republican thing or a Democrat thing or a United States thing. Everybody in the world knows somebody with a disability, and I've never met anybody who says, "Oh, I don't know anybody with a disability." Everybody knows now, especially everybody knows somebody with a disability, and so how you focus on um, how they're going to succeed. That NOD, National Organization of Disability, does tons of work about work and employment, my focus is college. So that's what I do every day. Go back to my mission of supporting students with disabilities so they can graduate from college.
Awesome. That's great.
Thank
Well,
you.
Dr. Toby, it's been
Yes.
awesome talking to you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, and remember, everybody go get the book, The Traveling IEP, on Amazon.
Thank
And
you.
I look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. See you later.
Yeah.